Robert, thank you very much for agreeing to take part in the Haematology Video Diaries. Maybe tell me a little bit about yourself before your diagnosis.
Well, the diagnosis came about through a very circuitous route, in that in March last year, that'd be March 2010, I had the misfortune to be beaten up in the daytime, actually, in Dublin, on my street. I was foolish enough to tell a chap that he was parking illegally on double yellow lines, and he took umbrage and got out of the van that he was parking and hit me a few severe thumps.
Wow.
So I went to my GP, and I didn't go for a few days. Funnily enough, it didn't feel so bad first, and then I just got sorer and sorer. And he took one look at me and obviously felt, and he said, "I don't even need an X-ray. You've 2 fractured ribs and a hairline fracture on your jaw." And I said, "Oh my God, what do we do?" And he said, "Well, actually nothing. You can't put your jaw in a sling or put plaster." So I just had to wait for it to get better by nature, and that took a few months, obviously. So after that, I just said, I better go in and have a full checkup, because just to see how things are and everything. So I went to my GP. He checked everything, all the normal things. He said, as far as I can see, everything's good.
When was that?
That would have been in the kind of early summer last year.
Okay.
And then he said, "Look, I think probably because both my parents died from heart-related diseases," he said, "I'm going to send you to a cardiologist just to be sure. Mm-hmm. So I went to a cardiologist who sent me for a CT coronary scan, which he said will absolutely conclusively show the condition of your heart and everything. There'll be no doubt, etc. Mm-hmm. So I did that in the matter, and I remember he asked to see me and said, now he didn't say, "Do you want the good news or the bad news first?" But he said, "Well, your heart is," well, he uses a phrase which is not, I don't like hearing, but he said, "For a man of your age, okay, your heart is in remarkably good condition. I can't see any serious blockages or anything, so that's really good." But he said, when we were studying the scan, we noticed that your lymph glands were enlarged. Now, at the time, that meant absolutely nothing to me. And he said, "Would you mind if I send you to a hematologist?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And at this stage, I wasn't too alarmed or anything, because I hadn't a notion what that meant.
Sure.
So I went to Peter O'Gorman, who was the hematologist, and he again said, we chatted, and he said, I'd like to send you in for a few tests, just to see, which were more scans and things like that. So then I came back to him, and he said basically that I had leukemia. Wow. Which now I have to say, this was over a period, and doctors don't take great interest in you unless there's something up, So I was suspicious that there was something up, And then I noticed when I went into the matter, the place I was sent to was the oncology ward. So I sort of figured, well, maybe I mightn't have anything, but there was a high likelihood that I would have something.
And when you saw that, like in oncology and the word hematology and lymph dams, did you put everything together, or?
I kind of felt, there must be something wrong, but I suppose I'm a fatalist. I mean, I just said, well, hopefully it'll be nothing, but if it's something, we just have to deal with it and get on with it, Mm-hmm. I didn't sort of run screaming out of the room saying, "Why me?" or anything like that, because that's utterly pointless. So I just said, "Okay, well, tell me a bit about it." And he said that I had CLL, Chronic Lymphocytic Leukemia. Mm-hmm. He said prognosis is good. He said you will have to have chemotherapy and all of that. And I said, when? And he said, as soon as possible. So.
How had you been feeling physically?
Absolutely fine. Now, as it transpired, occasionally tired. I had put that down to just being 68 or 67 then, you know. I presumed when you approach 70 you get tired, you know. But I didn't realise that tiredness is part of the leukemia thing. And I didn't notice that, because I didn't even know where my lymph glands were. Mm-hmm. But it only transpired when I got through all the chemo and everything, and they all were checking me and everything, and they all said, "Oh yeah, your lymph glands are after the successful chemo were reduced or gone down." And I suddenly, looked at myself. I had never noticed that, my neck, for instance, was slightly swollen or whatever, which was enlarged lymph glands, But I never knew. I just thought that was middle-age spread or, eating too much or something. I didn't, but it never gave me any trouble. I had no pain or nothing. So, I suppose that was the big surprise, was that I end up with this serious disease, mm-hmm. and I didn't have any symptoms or any kind of life problems or anything. I felt fine.
Can I bring you back to the time when Peter advised you that you had leukemia? Were you on your own, or was it?
Oh, I was on my own. Yeah.
You were on your own.
Yeah.
And what did you do when you left the rooms? What was?
I just walked home.
Did you?
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts on that journey?
I didn't. I just thought, well, that's. Well, I kind of.
Can you remember it, or is it something that?
I don't remember. I don't remember being in a state of shock or anything. I just said, well, that's, it's an illness. I've got a disease or an illness, and let's see what we have to do about it. Mm-hmm. I didn't. I don't know. I kind of never felt. I suppose because I was given a very positive kind of prognosis. That, I remember talking to Sean McCann, who I think he's retired now, but he used to run the bone marrow transplant unit in St. James's, who I know socially rather than medically. And I just said, what do you think? And he said, you'll be fine. He said, that's not a serious leukemia at all, So I was kind of, obviously comforted by all of that. The other thing both Peter and Sean advised me was, which would be impossible for me because I don't even own a computer, but don't go on the internet and don't obsess about your illness. And I think it was Sean said, because it wouldn't have been Peter, because he was my consultant, but Sean said, there comes a time in your life when you have to trust somebody, and, just trust the person that's dealing with your illness and go forward with that. I remember, I think it was the first time I was in for a chemo session. There was a chap beside me, and he was a nice fellow. Now, he'd been through the wars. I don't know what sort of cancer he had, but it was very serious, and he'd had major surgery and everything. But he'd a notebook, and every time they took his temperature, he was writing it in the book, and every time they took his bloods, he was writing it all down and weighing himself and everything. And I said, you drive yourself mad doing that. The professionals are paid to do all of that. Why should you do it yourself? And the same I felt about, now my wife at the time, who, had a computer, went on and printed out a few kind of things about CLL from the Mayo Clinic and places like that. And I kind of glanced at them, but I said, no, even if I read all this stuff, I'm still only an amateur at this. Why should I be kind of pitching myself against the specialist who's spent a lifetime working at this? And I kind of thought of it a bit like in my own profession, I think if I'm commissioned to do something, I don't expect the client to sort of come in and start drawing it for me beforehand or anything,
It's a very good parallel.
You kind of got to trust the professional that they're doing the right thing. And certainly, I have to say, I was told that I would have 6 months of chemotherapy, and at the end of December, early January, I remember I was in for my 4th session, one a month, and they came around and told me, well, that's the end of your chemo, you know. So, I mean, I think so far so good. I've done really well. I didn't have any disastrous reactions or anything. I didn't lose my hair. I didn't get mouth ulcers or rashes or all the things which, they said were a possibility. You know, although Peter was quite strong in the fact that he, I don't think it's too bad for a man in particular, but I don't mind. Wouldn't have minded if all my hair fell out, you know.
Sure.
But he said, no, I don't think that'll happen, you know.
And your chemotherapy once a month, and
Yeah.
was it intravenous?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It took usually about 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah, I would check in, and they wouldn't do much when I check in an afternoon, just get ready, and then you would be hooked up, and they would start, that night with, a drip, but saline drip or various
And
things.
you would stay in hospital?
Stay in there, and then the next day they'd move on to, you would get a kind of preparation thing first, and then finally you would get the chemicals, and then there were drips and what they call them, flushes and all this sort of thing. So basically, I was 2 or 3 days plugged in with stuff going in all the time. So there's a lot going on there, but at no stage did I find it uncomfortable, or did I feel ill or nauseous or anything, which was in contrast to some of my fellow sufferers. Like, there was one chap one time I was in there opposite me, and when I went in, he was there when I arrived, I had him pegged for an 80-year-old. And it was only after a day or so I realised he was in his 40s, but the chemo had whacked him so badly. His hair was falling out, he'd mouth ulcers, his lips were splitting, he'd a really bad time, And I was feeling a bit of a fraud in that I was fine, the first time, I think, I made a mistake, or maybe the nurses made a mistake, because I had so little trouble that I went home and I didn't have anything for nausea or anything, and I did feel, now not badly, but for a day or so I felt like I had a chronic hangover and felt
Sure.
as bad as you would with a bad hangover. But the next time I said, give me a prescription for whatever's needed. But even that only the first time lasted 2 days, that was all. And every subsequent visit I made sure I took the anti-nausea things, only for a day or so, so it never happened again,
So you said after the 4th cycle, we had originally been told it would be 6
Yeah,
cycles.
yeah.
And then after the 4th, you were advised that they were stopping?
Yeah, they were stopping, and I had to come back again. That would have been at the end of December, and I had to come back in January and go in again and have a repeat of all the tests that were done at the beginning, which obviously were to compare and contrast, one of which was the bone marrow extract, which...
How did you find that?
Well, because you get a local anaesthetic, it's not sore, but it's very uncomfortable. Because the thing about a local anaesthetic, and I think anyone who's had one, whether they're having dental work done or anything done, is you've no pain, but you can still feel what's going on. And somebody, you can't see because it's behind you, but they're obviously screwing something into your pelvis into that big bone to extract the marrow. And it is not pleasant, but it's unpleasant rather than painful or anything like that. Now, when all the anaesthetic and all wears off, and when you're at home, you have a sore arse for a few days, but that's it,
Did they warn you about that?
I think they said this might be a little sore, but again, not catastrophically.
Tolerable.
So it's very tolerable, you know. But you wouldn't be queuing up for one if you. And I believe I have to have another one.
It's probably a way of monitoring your leukemia.
I think after a year remission, I have to go back and have those tests again. So anyway.
So after the 4 months, were you surprised or were you relieved?
Well,
or what?
I was pleased because, you know, it's not that I had a bad time. You know, I have to say, and you know, and the staff were marvellous, and I didn't have any bad reactions. Now I think whether I'm lucky in that regard or whatever, but nevertheless, you know, I've better things to be doing with my time than spending 3 months in hospital, or 3 weeks in hospital 3 days in hospital every month, you know. So it was a relief that was behind me, you know. You know, I was well pleased with that.
I'm going to ask you about your family, and I suppose I'm going to bring you back to the time when you were diagnosed. Who did you first tell in your circle?
I told my wife, and I told my kids, and they all seemed very mature about it. But I think they were, you know, it was only afterwards they sort of confessed that they were really shocked, you know. But you know, like, whereas my son lives in Dublin, so I would see him fairly regularly. My daughter lives in Cork, and I think she was kind of a bit upset and you know, moping about it down there because she didn't see me, she didn't know what I looked like or anything like that. But you know, but everyone seemed to cope with it quite well, you know.
Were you surprised looking back at it retrospectively? Did you, or is that what you would have thought, that the family's response
No,
was?
I expected them to be kind of sensible about it, which I think they were. And I don't know, I mean, I know that years ago, you know, leukemia was almost a sentence of death, but I was aware that things have moved on quite dramatically. In fact, I read an article, now this wouldn't have helped me when I was diagnosed originally, but during the period when I was having chemo, I read an article, I think in the health supplement in the Irish Times. Now it was CML, I think, but it was a leukemia, and they were writing an article about it, and just the headline started off, 20 years ago, there was zero opportunity of recovery from a diagnosis, and now it's 90-something%. So I said, well, we seem to have turned a corner here, you know. And you know, I was pretty confident, all things being equal, that you know, the medical industry would look after me.
Did you think about your own mortality?
Well, when you're nearly 70, it's inevitable you do anyway, whether you're sick or not. But it kind of brought things home to me in that regard. I mean, the obvious thing which really, you know, and we're all still coping with it, that brought home the real intimations of mortality was when my wife died in February. Which was a big shock, obviously, and particularly one of the things I remember was that she was having trouble with her hip, or was it her knee? Jeez, I can't remember. But you know, she was told she'd have to go in and have a job done or whatever. And I always remember saying, "Look, we'll get you through the cancer first before I go to get the hip done." And of course, she never got it done, you know.
And you had just finished EUFO
I finished, and it was almost like a relay race. She got sick, you know. As I finished, she got sick, you know, which was, you know, was very strange, really, you know.
It sounds very traumatic, I have to say.
Yeah.
You know, you're dealing with your issue, and then Betty's the healthy one, so to speak, and then.
And it all fell apart for her, you know. It was really terrible. But I have to say that, and not associated, I think, with the cancer at all, was when I went in that January to, you know, get the final all clear or remission statement or whatever, and have all those tests and all of that. They said, "Oh, by the way, we've noticed, you know, with your blood tests that your blood sugar level is very high. You have type 2 diabetes.
Oh, God.
So I moved, well, maybe it's a good move to move from cancer to diabetes.
Chronic illness, isn't it?
But
And how are you managing that?
I'm managing very well, I think, but with deep regret that I can't eat chocolate bars anymore or things like that. Which
Diabetic one's not good enough.
well, apparently they're not good for you.
Long term or
well, apparently somebody explained that diabetic chocolate they replace the sugar with some and if you eat too much you can get chronic diarrhea. So I said, no, I don't need to go there. So like actually I find I'm actually eating a lot better now because I cut out sugar as best as I can and eat good food. So I think my health has ironically improved as a consequence of having cancer and diabetes.
Did anything change for you that when you were diagnosed with the leukemia? Did you make a conscious decision? And you spoke about diet there, but did you make any changes to your life?
No, I just did what I was told.
And would you normally have done that or not? Was that something new?
When somebody who knows much more about a subject than I do, I tend to take their advice.
Okay. It sounds to me, going back to your family, that you had there was open communication.
Oh yeah.
People ask questions, or that there was freedom to ask you questions and to verse their fears or that. I would get the sense that that's how your family was all the time. That wasn't something new.
I know we've always been fairly open, So, apart from my daughter not telling me about her boyfriends, but I think that's a different issue.
Strategy. Your wider circle, how did you manage that?
A lot of them were more shocked actually than we were in the family. I think because a lot of them had no exposure to this sort of thing, and the cancer word scares the life out of people,
It does.
So I think some of my friends were really shocked, and didn't know what to say or do or anything, and I would say, no, it's fine,
Did you find that, that people behaved perhaps differently towards you, or?
No, I don't think so, but they would say, Jesus, that's terrible, or something like that, And I said, no, we're doing fine, But,
did you work during that period, Robert?
Oh yeah. I've never stopped working. I think that's one of the, and also, in the context of the bereavement and everything, I do believe that one of the best ways of coping with all of this, whether it's illness or bereavement or whatever, is to be busy, I think the worst thing you can do is, sit at home moping and thinking about yourself and all of that,
Did you do that at all?
No.
And did you have any days where your mood was...
all the time you have dark moments, that's but they pass, with the bereavement thing, it's obviously more. It happens more often because, in my case, I didn't realize it because you don't think of these things, but like since February, it's been the first time I've lived on my own in my entire life, because I lived at home and then I got married, So I was never on my own ever. So it's a learning curve and it's a strange experience. So every day there's a kind of, something to remind you that this is different,
Sure. And in relation to you're self-employed and you're an artist, and you mentioned that you get commissioned work a lot. Did you find that your experiences, be it the bereavement or the leukemia, did that influence your?
No, funnily enough, the one part of my work that I think, because half of it was done after I learned about the leukemia, I think you could look at that objectively and say, yeah, that's work that's been influenced by that experience, because I started, now I have to say it started before the diagnosis, but it wasn't completed, was a series of self-portraits that I had agreed to do for Wexford Arts Centre for October last year. And I decided to do these very intensive, kind of concentrated self-portraits, which are all about intimations of mortality, you know, about the aging process. And, you know, like some people said, well, you weren't very complimentary about yourself. And precisely, they're not meant to be, you know, pin-ups or anything like that. They're about aging, you know. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you know, when the diagnosis came in, that added more fuel to that kind of argument that I was engaging with in the work. I remember my daughter came up from Cork one day and came to look at how the work was going, and there's one particularly pained kind of self-portrait, and she said, "What's the title of that?" And I said, "I was thinking of calling it Guess Who's Got Cancer." But they don't have any titles. It's self-portrait number 1, self-portrait number 2. So I would, but interestingly enough, they weren't commissioned works. They were, you know, personal works.
Okay.
And I think they would be the only things that I've done in the last year that would show any influence of, you know, what I've been through. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say, which is quite, I think, interesting, and I didn't plan it like that, but I would argue that some of the work that I've done in the last year, in the course of all of this fairly traumatic stuff, is some of the best work I've ever done, you know. Now, I'm not advising that you should get cancer and have a bereavement, etc., in order to improve your work. But coincidentally, that has happened, you know. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. That must be gratifying in some way, or...
Oh, yeah. Like I did a commissioned portrait of James Joyce for UCD, and I was very pleased the way that worked out, you know. And, I mean, I was working on that during all of that horrible time, you know.
Did you, I suppose, was there ever a day that you didn't have enough energy to go to your studio?
No. Never. Now, there were days when at about 4 o'clock I said, I'm going home for a nap, you know.
Sure.
But I never felt in the morning I can't face another day or anything like that, you know. Yeah.
So fatigue was one of your biggest, you mentioned that prior to the diagnosis as well, that was kind of the only warning shot as such that you would have had. In relation to your journey, if we call it, through hospital, you mentioned that you had a very good experience. Is there anything from, I suppose, looking back again over that time that we could do differently, or that maybe something wasn't in situ that could be, or, you know, just how it was managed?
No, I think everything was fine. The only things I find, and I think every patient will agree, it doesn't matter whether you're in for an ingrown toenail or cancer treatment, is the bureaucracy in hospitals is wearisome. Like, I mean, on several occasions I was dying to get home and I had to wait for hours. You know, I'm finished treatment for whoever it is to come and discharge you or things like that. But I don't know if there's any way around that kind of thing, you know, but you know, that for a patient can be quite frustrating, you know. Sure. And I think they could probably do better. Now, I don't know how much information you need, but sometimes, you know, you feel that nobody really, you're only the patient, nobody needs to tell you what's going on, you know.
Sure, so communication may...
Communication, I think, could be helpful. Now, I have to say, I was given, which I didn't read because it was all too much, but like when, you know, the various what do you call them, injections and things, they would give you a document about what it was and side effects and everything.
Sign your life away.
Yeah, and the names of some of these things were unpronounceable, you know. But I noticed, I mean, as I say, I didn't have any reactions, but like kind of scary things, like when they would come around, you know, every month there would be, you know, one would go in with a drip and all, and that was all. Although, and then they would come, and 2 nurses would come, and they were all covered up in plastic and everything, and masks and goggles and everything, and they would take out this injection like a bicycle pump, you know, and they'd say, and they would go through a whole routine, you know, I think to make sure you're getting the right one and not somebody else's, you know. So there's that whole routine, and then they'd say, now if you feel anything, if you feel warmth, or if you feel any kind of pain or any sensation at all, tell us immediately. And then the first time I just did what I was told. Second time I said, why? And they said, well, if the needle slips and this goes in, not into the vein, it will destroy your flesh and your tissues and everything. And you're saying, what are you putting in me?
Poison.
But anyway, I didn't have any troubles, you know.
Looking back, I suppose,